If God is truly sovereign, then why does suffering find us when we least expect it? This question doesn't arise from intellectual doubt, but from the shock of the soul when life slips out of our control. Charles Spurgeon used to say that God's sovereignty is the heaviest and at the same time most comforting truth that the human heart can bear. Heaviest, because it crushes pride. Comforting, because it eliminates chance. Right from the first lines of the book of Job, we are not invited to observe a common human drama, but to enter an invisible court, where God's throne is already occupied before any tear falls to the ground. When Job declares, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted," he is not repeating a doctrine learned in childhood. He is speaking after having been stripped of everything that sustained his identity. Spurgeon taught that divine sovereignty is not fully revealed when life is organized, but when it is broken. While everything is in order, God seems useful. When everything crumbles, he reveals himself as necessary. And it is precisely at this point that the text captures us. Job does not speak as a victor, but as someone who has been pushed to the limit of his own understanding. The sovereignty of God is not presented here as an abstract concept, but as a living, active, inescapable reality. There is no room for luck, misfortune, or coincidence. Spurgeon firmly rejected any idea of a God who merely reacts to events. For him, a God who reacts does not govern, he only observes. The biblical God reigns. He reigns over creation, which exists because he willed it. He reigns over providence, sustaining everything by the word of his power. He reigns over salvation, choosing, calling, and accomplishing what man could never begin alone. If this is true, then a question arises. Where is humanity when God governs all things? The text of Job presents us with a man irreproachable in the eyes of God, and yet deeply shaken by the revelation of divine sovereignty. Spurgeon saw in this an intentional paradox. The more a man truly knows God, the less confident he becomes in himself. Job is not being punished. He is being guided. He is not being discarded. He is being deepened. But who, in their right mind, desires this path? Who desires to know a God who does not ask permission to act? The sovereignty of God confronts the most dangerous illusion of the human heart, that we are in control. While everything is going well, this illusion remains comfortable. But when the ground disappears, when the answers don't come, when God's silence settles in, the soul is forced to choose between two things: to trust or to harden. Spurgeon affirmed that true faith begins exactly where explanation ends, not when we understand, but when we surrender. Job, in acknowledging that no plan of God can be thwarted, is confessing something that deeply wounds the human ego. History does not revolve around us. It moves toward an end determined by God, not by the desires, merits, or sufferings of man. Does this console or frighten? It depends on the heart that listens. For the proud, it is a threat. For the brokenhearted, it is refuge. This is only the first impact of divine sovereignty on Job's soul. We have not yet entered the valley of silence, nor have we heard the questions that descend like thunder. Here, all we see is a man before a God who can do all things. And perhaps the question that echoes now is not about Job, but about us. Are we prepared to trust in a God who reigns even when he does not explain? There are times when life seems like a perfectly ordered house until, without warning, a storm rips the roof off overnight. In the morning, everything is still there, but nothing is as it was before. Charles Spurgeon knew this feeling well and said that God sometimes allows the ground to disappear, not to lose us, but to teach us to look up. It is in this unstable territory that the drama of Job ceases to be an ancient tale and begins to touch the daily experience of anyone who has ever been surprised by pain. Job didn't wake up expecting to lose everything. Like any father, any worker, any upright man, he followed his routine, cared for his family, managed his possessions, prayed for his children. Life seemed predictable, and perhaps that's what makes the impact so profound. Suffering didn't arrive as a response to an obvious mistake, but as an unwelcome visit, without explanation, without warning, without apparent logic. How many people watch this text with the same silent question in their hearts? Why me? In a short span of time, Job sees his financial stability crumble, his children die, his body fall ill, and his dignity exposed. It's the kind of sequence that resembles the news we see every day, or the stories we silently hear in the corridors of life. Someone who loses their job, then their health, then their family, then their hope. Spurgeon said that suffering rarely comes in isolated installments. It usually arrives in waves, as if wanting to test not only the body's resistance but the depth of faith. And then something even more disturbing emerges: the silence of God. Job speaks, asks, cries out, protests. He neither hides his pain nor disguises his confusion. His words echo like ours on long nights when prayer seems not to reach beyond the ceiling. What hurts most is not just the suffering itself, but the absence of an answer. Spurgeon affirmed that divine silence is one of the most severe disciplines of the soul, because it forces us to decide whether we trust God for who He is or only for what He does. While the sky seems closed, the earth becomes noisy. Job's wife, weary of the pain, suggests giving up. Friends who arrive with good intentions end up turning consolation into accusation. This dynamic is familiar. How many times, in the midst of pain, do we hear phrases that do not heal, but only deepen the wound? How many times does judgment come disguised as advice? Spurgeon warned that misinterpreted pain can lead sincere people to speak in God's name when God has not spoken. Even so, something unexpected happens in Job's heart. At the darkest point in the narrative, when everything would indicate a definitive rupture, he makes a declaration that doesn't stem from emotion, but from conviction. I know that my Redeemer lives. This phrase doesn't solve the problem, doesn't end the suffering, doesn't bring immediate relief. It merely affirms a certainty amidst the absence of answers, and perhaps this is the most disconcerting twist in the story. Job's faith doesn't grow when the pain diminishes, but when it intensifies. Spurgeon taught that the purest faith is not that which celebrates when it receives, but that which remains when it does not understand. Job sees no way out, has no explanation, receives no clear signs that everything will be all right. Yet, he chooses to trust. This silent choice creates a profound tension. If God is sovereign and remains silent, what will come next? Is the silence abandonment or preparation? It is at this point that the narrative becomes unbearably expectant, for something greater is about to happen, something that does not answer questions but completely transforms whoever dares to remain before God. When God finally breaks the silence, He doesn't do it as we expect. There are no explanations, no justifications, no direct answers to the questions Job accumulated during endless nights. Charles Spurgeon said that God rarely satisfies human curiosity because the human heart needs something greater than information. It needs revelation. The silence ends, but not to soothe the mind, it ends to confront the soul. God's voice doesn't come as a therapeutic whisper, but as a presence that displaces Job from the center of his own story. God speaks, and in speaking, He does not explain suffering. He reveals Himself. Every question posed from heaven seeks not information, but exposition. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I commanded chaos and bounded the sea? Spurgeon observed that when God asks, man is not invited to answer, but to acknowledge. Job realizes that he tried to judge God's infinite work with a ruler that was too short, shaped by pain, time, and emotion. The effect of this revelation is immediate. Job does not feel humiliated. He feels reduced to the right measure. It is not cruel crushing, but realignment. The glory of God does not destroy the soul that surrenders. It only undoes the illusion of control. Faith ceases to be an emotional defense and becomes conscious submission. Before divine greatness, the questions that seemed urgent begin to lose their power. But if God doesn't answer Job's most important questions, then why does He decide to speak now? Spurgeon taught that there is a profound difference between hearing about God and being placed before him. Job knew doctrine, history, and tradition, but he had not yet been exposed to the vastness of divine rule in this way. When God reveals himself, Job realizes that his pain was not the center of reality. God always was. This realization does not erase suffering, but places it within something greater, higher, and more secure than any isolated explanation. At that moment, something rare happens. Job learns without receiving answers. He understands without being informed. The revelation does not solve the enigma of suffering, but dissolves the need to control it. Spurgeon affirmed that God does not bow to human judgment. It is man who must learn to live before God's judgment. Divine sovereignty is not a puzzle to be assembled, but a throne to be recognized. Here comes an unexpected turn. The more God speaks, the less Job feels the need to speak. The words that once overflowed now recede. The heart that once questioned now contemplates. Presence replaces argument. The silence that once hurt now teaches. But what happens to a man when he discovers he has spoken too much before a God who always knew everything? Job confesses that he spoke of what he did not understand, not out of malice, but out of limitation. Spurgeon said that spiritual maturity begins when a person realizes that their knowledge is always partial. Those who speak much of themselves have not yet seen God up close. Those who truly see God learn to measure their own words. Job is not condemned for having spoken, but transformed by realizing how much he ignored. This discovery does not produce destructive guilt, but lucid humility. Job does not lose his identity. He finds it in the right place. He learns that God does not owe explanations, but offers presence. Divine sovereignty does not respond to human suffering on man's terms, but invites man to trust on God's terms. What if the true purpose of silence wasn't to distance us, but to prepare us for a vision that changes everything? There is a truth that is rarely spoken aloud. God's omnipotence is not first revealed in miracles, but in stark contrast to human frailty. Charles Spurgeon insisted that man only begins to understand who God is when he discovers, without romanticization, who he himself is not. Job reaches this point when he confesses, "I know that you can do all things." This phrase does not spring from joyful worship, but from a wounded body, a weary mind, and a soul that has tried every possible route and found no way out in any of them. The Bible doesn't mince words in showing how limited human beings are. Time bends the back, weakens the legs, blurs the vision, and steals strength that once seemed permanent. Simple biological data shows that with each passing decade, the body loses muscle mass, reaction speed, and regenerative capacity. Even the strongest, richest, and most disciplined, without exception, are heading towards wear and tear. Spurgeon used to ironically comment on the illusion of self-sufficiency, saying that man boasts of his strength, but cannot prevent a single hair from turning gray. Job learns this the hard way. His body, once healthy, is now a map of wounds. His mind, once secure, now oscillates between pain and silence. His soul, once firm, now clings only to one certainty: God can do anything. This conviction doesn't eliminate the pain, but it prevents utter despair. It's like someone who, amidst a shipwreck, doesn't see land but trusts that the ocean still obeys a creator. Divine omnipotence is not a theological detail. It is the last refuge when all other structures fail. Historical accounts show that Spurgeon, during his own periods of deep depression, repeated to himself truths about God's power as one anchors oneself in something unchanging. He said that if God were not all-powerful, faith would be merely a fragile emotional consolation. But because God is all-powerful, hope does not depend on circumstances. Job does not believe because he feels strong. He believes because he recognizes that he is too weak to support himself alone. Here emerges an unlikely contrast that renews the narrative. The more man recognizes his limitations, the more space there is for God's power to manifest itself. The modern world teaches that strength lies within us. Scripture affirms that true strength is outside, above, and beyond us. Job discovers that there is no shame in being small before an infinite God. Danger lies only in feigning greatness where it does not exist. God's omnipotence also dismantles another common illusion, that some situations are irreversible. For man, many things are irreversible. For God, no situation is beyond the reach of his power. Spurgeon said that God never finds a closed door. He creates one when he wants. This truth is not a promise of an easy life, but a guarantee that nothing escapes divine rule, not even chaos. By declaring that God can do all things, Job is not demanding immediate intervention. He is repositioning his soul in the face of reality. He understands that his weakness does not disqualify his faith, it deepens it. Divine omnipotence does not humiliate the broken man, but sustains him. And the more Job accepts this truth, the more the narrative moves away from isolated pain and closer to something greater, denser, and more mysterious. A God who governs all and yet cares deeply for a man covered in dust and ashes. There is a decisive moment in anyone's spiritual journey when accumulated knowledge ceases to be sufficient. It is when what was known about God no longer bears the weight of lived reality. Job reaches exactly this point when he declares, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." Charles Spurgeon affirmed that there is a chasm between knowing about God and being exposed to his presence. One is information, the other is transformation. And this passage marks a silent yet profound turning point in Job's story. Up to this point, Job knew God through tradition, religious practice, and the reputation he had built over the years. He was upright, righteous, respected, someone who did everything right. Yet something was missing. Suffering did not create faith in Job, but it removed the layers that prevented a deeper encounter. Spurgeon said that God sometimes leads his children down dark paths not to punish them, but to lead them to a light that could not be seen otherwise. Job did not lose God in his suffering. He only lost the simplistic ideas he had about him. This discovery, however, is not comfortable. When Job realizes that he knew God only by hearsay, he also realizes how limited his understanding was. It's not a matter of gross ignorance, but of incomplete perception. It's like someone who spends their whole life observing the sea from a distance and, suddenly, is thrown into it. The experience changes everything. Faith ceases to be theoretical and becomes existential. God is no longer just someone to be talked about. He is someone before whom one stands. This new level of knowledge brings tension, not immediate relief. The more Job sees God, the more clearly he sees himself. Then an unexpected reaction arises. Instead of personal exaltation, there is brokenness. Job recognizes himself as small, limited, incapable of sustaining any moral superiority before divine greatness. Spurgeon taught that those who truly draw near to God do not emerge inflated with pride, but emptied of themselves. The presence of God does not massage the ego, it silences it. Here the narrative intensifies. The most pious man of his generation finds himself insufficient before the glory he now beholds. Not because he sinned more than others, but because he saw further. The greater the light, the more visible the imperfections become. Job doesn't discover new sins. He discovers a new measure of holiness. And this completely changes his inner posture. He no longer argues, no longer debates, no longer defends himself. He surrenders. This surrender sets the stage for the outcome, but it also deepens the mystery. If Job now sees God more clearly, why is there still no visible restoration? Why doesn't the story resolve itself immediately? Spurgeon said that God rarely hastens the end when he is still shaping the inner self. The greatest miracle is not the change in circumstances, but the transformation of the heart that learns to trust without guarantees. At this point, the reader is led to a final tension. Job has already been broken, already aligned, already brought to the deepest surrender. Pride has fallen, defense has ceased, the soul has bowed. What more is needed? If God governs all, if Job now sees clearly, if faith has been purified by fire, then something must happen. The narrative seems suspended, like the silence before a decisive act, and the question that remains in the air is inevitable. What will God do with a man who has finally stopped merely hearing about him and has begun to live in his presence? The story of Job doesn't begin with restored riches or public applause, but with a silent gesture that changes everything. He prays for those who wronged him. It is at this point that God's sovereignty ceases to be merely contemplated and begins to be lived. Charles Spurgeon said that God never finishes his work simply by restoring circumstances. He begins by restoring the heart. Job had already been broken, aligned, emptied of himself. Now he needed to take a practical step that would reveal whether the transformation was real. Praying for those who accused him was not a symbolic act. It was a deep cut into human pride. This detail directly affects us. Most people accept the idea of trusting in God, but few are willing to abandon self-defense. We want quick justice, immediate recognition, public explanations. Job chooses another path. He leaves the arena of justification and enters the realm of intercession. This movement reveals something powerful. It is not possible to harbor resentment and sincere prayer at the same time. One of the two always falls. When Job begins to pray, something invisible happens before any visible change. His heart becomes free. It is then that God acts in a complete way. Health is restored, years are prolonged, finances return twofold, friendships are mended, marriage endures, and new children fill the house. But the greatest sign of restoration is not in the quantity of what Job receives, but in the quality of who he becomes. He doesn't just return to being the upright man he was at the beginning. He becomes someone who knows God through experience, not just reputation. Suffering did not distance him from God. It brought him closer to the center of the divine will. There is a direct and practical application here for those watching. God's sovereignty does not call us to passivity, but to active surrender. This means trusting even when we don't understand, ceasing to fight for control, abandoning the need to explain everything, and choosing to obey in small daily decisions. It means forgiving when the wound still hurts, praying when the desire is to remain silent, remaining when the impulse is to flee. Personal transformation begins when we accept that God governs even what we cannot explain. Perhaps you are experiencing a silence similar to Job's. Perhaps you have lost something important. Perhaps you are tired of unanswered questions. History teaches us that God's silence is not absence, it is preparation. The same God who governed every detail of Job's life continues to govern today. He has not lost control of your story. The sovereignty that wounded Job's pride was the same sovereignty that sustained him to the end. And it can sustain you too. Before any external change, allow God to adjust your inner self. Stop fighting alone. Trust. Pray. Release forgiveness. Take the next step even without seeing the complete path. True restoration begins within and manifests outwardly. If this message spoke to you, like this video so that more people can be reached. If you wish, leave a comment sharing your experience even anonymously, and subscribe to the channel to continue walking with us in reflections that strengthen faith and transform life.